I'm gonna be jumping along to like in a panel. Um, okay. I'm not here. Great. So everybody's here. Usual POIs are heavily encouraged for engagement. Please do so, except for POIs. Maximum speaking time is 8 minutes and 15 seconds. Beyond that, you will not be writing anything. Without further ado, we start the debate with Eva.
Give me a few seconds to organize my notes. I'll start my speech in 3, 2. Ladies and gentlemen, realize how first in the status quo, countries and unions or organizations rely too much, too heavily into countries like China, right? Because they're advanced in technologies and whatnot. They have the cheap labor and whatnot, meaning that they're relying too much. More importing becomes there. But first of all, let's clarify what the EU is, right? EU has a single market, meaning they allow everyone to sell and trade without having tariffs within the EU. But secondly, they have inequality. That's one of the main issues that's been going on around the EU that hasn't been solved up until now. Even if you have like countries seeing like Germany or whatnot being a very rich country, there's still lots of countries that are very it's different from the countries that you might see, meaning that again inequality exists. But even if they tried, and they have tried to deter that, but it hasn't succeeded until now, right? But how do we support it? Supporting the additional tax that's been added to the original tax, meaning that who's taxing this is the EU, because EU has the capability, they have the representations of each countries, meaning that they can distribute the tax. They're going to collect the tax and distribute it to countries around the EU to help with those two issues, right? But then why do we need to tax, right? First of all, relying heavily on China is bad because, again, China's are predatory countries. You might know them because they're communists, but again, they have the mindset of a capitalist, right? They want to find most profit, meaning that I will elaborate further in my arguments, but then again, it's going to be further extended in the second speaker. But then again, why do we need to tax is because we need to deter and change the behavior of China, right? Because we do not want them to over dominate and to dominate the market, right? Because in this case, they want to impose all their products to countries starting from the EU, which is a great nation. It has a lot areas covered, right? But with greater tax, it means we're going to deter people from buying the cars in the EU, right? So the EU people within the European Union wouldn't buy these cars, meaning that China, it would stop China from actually imposing and dominating over this market, right? But first on, before I start the arguments, any POIs? All right, I'll start with my first argument. Why self-production is necessary in the EU, right? First of all, China wants to dominate, right? China likes to debt trap nations. Why? Because they want two things. They want to dominate the economy, and secondly, they want to compete with the US, right? They see them as competitors, meaning that how China wants to dominate these are basically using trade routes, like ports and roads and airports. They want to dominate over that so they can have an advantage in economy routes. For example, Sri Lanka, right? China has been putting and helping them in aid, helping them, funding them their infrastructure and doing good deeds. But then again, when Sri Lanka couldn't pay back the fundings that was given by China, they debt trap Sri Lanka by saying you cannot buy them, and then they're going to trade it with something else. In this case, they traded it with the port in Sri Lanka, right? Because they could not pay the funding. 100 years of authority over that port now goes to China. But here are the reasonings as to why self-production is necessary. First of all, EU has a single market, meaning that every goods and sold will circulate within the market. And plus, they have the capacity, they have the money, because again, EU is noted for their high tourism in Europe, right? Because they get a lot of income from them. For example, the tulip fields and whatnot. But first, they have the financial capacity to do so because of high tourism. But secondly, they also are known for good education. I mean that many people are educated, they have high research skills and whatnot, right? Because first of all, they have a lot of countries look to them in education, and it's clearly seen because a lot of the education there are successful members, or they also have university in the QS World Ranking, right? Meaning that both financial and knowledge exist, right? They also have a lot of population, meaning that thirdly, human labor and human capacity also exist. Therefore, it is feasible for the European Union to produce its own cars and products and whatnot, right? But then second reason, the heavy tariffs mean that it changes the incentives. It makes the European Union to want to go to self-production because again, why does it need to be self-production? First, we've proven to you why the EU has the capacity to do so. But second of all, because they're going to strive for self-production, meaning that all the profit will come to the EU because again, China will pay the EU to put the taxes and whatnot, right? Meaning that when they do self-production, they're not going to depend on other countries because again, they have their own market to do so, right? Because EU is not just a single country, it's filled with 27 countries there. But what's the impact of it, right? When self-production strives for innovation, okay, prepare.
Like, isn't when their reliance towards China, meaning the thing that they want to produce is to begin with very complex and they have to rely on it at the very first place.
Could you repeat your POA?
Isn't the why they rely towards China is because they cannot produce it themselves and they don't have the capacity, therefore they have to rely on this.
Right. The reason why EU supports or relies on China first is because China gives cheap. Their costs on giving machines or products or vehicles to other countries are with cheap money, right? It's because, again, there's two characteristics of China. They want to dominate the economy and they also want to compete with the US, especially when the European Union is known to be good friends with America, meaning that the China wants to find good incentives within the European Union, right? But right, on to my impacts. First of all, self-production strives for innovation within the EU, meaning that when they won't rely on China, they won't focus on China in giving in their vehicles and whatnot, but they will focus more within their domestic economy, within their domestic production, increasing the industry, increasing the factories, increasing the education and the infrastructure, making them know how to research and find the ways to create these own vehicles. Again, it creates innovation within the EU. But then again, because we have these innovation, it causes them to have better market because again, it creates market segmentation because everything produced within your own country will cost cheaper with comparatively when you import something, right? Meaning that when the EU strives for this innovation, these vehicles, these cars that might not be available to countries that again are inequality in the EU, they can still afford it, right? Now, therefore, with those things, cars which are necessary for day-to-day life activities, right, is accessible for people who cannot buy it because it's domestically made, meaning that the tax and tariffs that was taxed by the EU can be distributed to two ways. One, to help the EU grow as the economy grow in giving their subsidies and whatnot. But secondly, it can also help to invest the EV production, meaning that it can help invest in research, how to create the most optimal vehicle, or how to create another alternative, for example, hydrogen-based cars or whatnot, right? So they have the research, they have the skills, they have the funding from the EU, right? But then again, because you strive for innovation, there's competition within the markets of the EU, right? When there's competition, the innovation will of course be higher. So even if the opposition might say, oh, but with China importing, there's better competition, better innovation, we say it's not true because European unions consist of, again, 27 countries, meaning that they have competition to begin with. And with domestic production, they have more competition because they have their own neighboring countries who wants to produce the best, right? Comparatively in opposition, they are going to be prone to debt trap by China, because China can quote unquote help and keep selling cheap vehicles to the EU while collecting data and whatnot. For example, in Africa, where they built the African Union filled with bugs to steal their data, to steal their information and whatnot, meaning that using those information that China might give to the European Union can blackmail the EU in trading or giving them trade points for trains, for roads, for planes, for ships, and etc. Meaning that again, innovation would not happen in opposition in their side, because they're reliant on China because of the advances they believe that China has, right? But even if there is, it's going to be slow, because again, first they rely on China, but second, the people within the European Union are going to be lazy to innovate, because again, they're going to think China exists. Therefore, we are proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul?
Give me a minute to prepare this. Just a minute. Before I start my speech, my pronouns I should have. Oh. Gak bisa di stop. We say that is so ironic coming from team proposition, saying that these European unions, for example, are relying so much on these China countries in terms of Chinese cars, without explaining what is the urgency, for example, for these countries to do so anyways, right? We say that exactly when they stated that it's because it's more cheap, for example, there's a mass production that is happening. Then we do not understand what is the urgency coming from their side, why they want to add the significant amount of taxes towards their towards these cars anyways, pals, right? And if we're able to prove why it will be better towards the certain market in the UE Union, for example, and how research and development can still exist, however better on our side, then we should win this debate. Two rebuttals coming from team opposition. First of all, on the idea how they will be able to self-produce, for example, and you do not need to rely on Chinese cars, and etc. The responses towards this: no, panels. Realize that the context towards these European unions, for example, is how they're so exposed to the use of green technology, right? This is why we say that this is exactly why they are relying towards China, for example, because they are more advanced in terms of the research and development for electronic cars, for example, and they want to implement this in these certain countries anyways. Therefore, we say that producing their own green technology is so hard, pals. They also have not explained, like, how does this even look like? What is the mechanism? We say that it is so hard because they do not have the advanced development for this, and we say that this is at times sensitive issues, for example, and we cannot just rely on ourselves. We need to rely on another country that has the capacity to do this. Therefore, we cannot add this additional tax. But then second of all, even if they are able to create this certain like a self-production and etc., we say that it is still going to be like a long process, right? We still say that there's going to be like trials and errors in doing this. But realize that the context is how it is so time sensitive in terms of like eco-friendly facilities and etc. that these European countries want to use, because they're more work towards the usage of these eco-friendly facilities. This looks like how Denmark, for example, is like applying in so many in factories that they need this certain the green technologies and etc. But then third, it's better on our side, exactly because we rely on these China countries for their electronic vehicles, for example, or even normal vehicles. We say it is better because we're able to get it in a more like cheap price, for example. We do not have to wait for our own development, for example, or like China is now not interested in on our side, on their side, because they do not want to be offered with a big price, because exactly they're capitalistic and etc. But then second rebuttal, in terms of where they say that you can now invest in research and development that can lead to better competition. First of all, we say that we do not understand how just suddenly because of this you can get a better research and development towards all of these 27 countries, right? We say that these different countries have different interests and capacities. For example, you cannot like generalize America, for example, or the Denmark, for example, has the same like capacity to do this and has the interest to do this research and development that can lead to better competition. But then second of all, example, we say that innovation still exists on our side, and it's better because now when they have already gained like the exposure, for example, from the Chinese technology and how they're able to get mass important towards their country, they're now able to like do more analyzation. For example, what are the qualities of these Chinese cars, and they can also go hand in hand with investing towards their own in development, and also still having if the import cars coming from China, right? But then moving on to our cases, two points of framing here. First of all, one point of framing, sorry, how does these significant tariffs look like, right? We looks like that this is a significant amount of tariffs towards China, where like the government or companies are there's a regulation where they're obligated to pay more taxes towards this, right? We say that this is higher than the existing UE duty and the average cost in the export-import system, right? We say that comparatively, what do we want on our side? We do not want China to have to pay this higher or significant amount of taxes, and it should be implemented like the other trade system, for example, such as the normal taxes that is used in the system, and etc. Two things to prove here. First of all, why is it counterproductive towards the demand of these Chinese car productions? And two, how are we able to create better competition and research development on our side? First argument then, why as a European Union, adding taxes is only counterproductive towards the interest in this economic market. Panels, we need to characterize that the interest of this European Union is that they're very exposed to the uses of green technology, right? We say that even if they have not had a further research implementing in like cars, for example, therefore it's only America that is monopolizing in terms of Tesla, but they have already been implementing it in terms of like factories or eco-friendly technologies, for example, right? We say that this is because most of these countries are, for example, environmentalist movements are more open towards like how it will harm the environment degradation in these certain countries and etc. panels, right? Therefore, we say that meanwhile, even if these certain in China, when they're going to import these Chinese cars, it is not going to be all electrical vehicles that can be eco-friendly, for example, but it is going to be the majority, and they do have the interest in the first place to import us towards the European Unions. But then how is this interest not achieved when you're going to give the significant amount of taxes? Two things here. A, realize that now China does not have the interest to import because there is an overpriced amount of tax, right? We say that exactly when you say that they're capitalistic, then there is still like a bigger demand from other countries to want to have their inventions. Therefore, they don't see it as something urgent to still apply to the tax rate in these European countries, right? We say that it's bad because realize how exactly when we are reliant towards the electric cars, towards the use of eco-friendly, because now it is more cheap, for example, and then there is a mass production, right? We say that other alternatives such as Tesla and etc. are still inaccessible because of the high price, or how in the certain research development it is still going to take a long time, and it is a time-sensitive issue. But then second of all, but then B, realize how also the proposition cannot come into this debate and say just because of it's now cheap or a mass production, it will have a bad quality, right? We say that no. Realize how still whenever in an import-export system, you will still have to, for example, have like certain regulations or checks before like your certain products are being imported in the country. Therefore, we still say like cases such as malfunctions and etc. won't exist on our side, right? Therefore, we say it is better because now we are still relying towards the use of these certain cars on our side that is beneficial towards how like these electronic cars are used in the eco-friendly interest towards these European Unions. But then second argument then, how we create a betterment in the UE and Chinese relationship in the economic market and research and development. Panels, let's contextualize how the tension between European countries and China is very high, right? This looks like how like the global south and the global north are against each other, for example, even in the terms of market where they are able to compete and etc. Or how these European countries realize that China is so capitalistic in terms of wanting to sell all of their advanced technologies and etc. Therefore, we say two layers. Why is it better on our side? First of all, we create a better economic relationship on our side, exactly because like a European has like a small market, for example, they still rely on like Asian countries for like their products or their resources or their technology. We say that we have a better relationship as a UA union, for example, because now these countries are going to come to you also in terms of when they still need other benefits, or to our countries when we do need other benefits, not also in terms of cars, for example, but like the producers that these like China is able to give to us, like technologies in other aspects, etc. Because now we are not going to limit them with a certain taxes that will only be like not going to be beneficial towards China at the end of the day. You can't anymore. But then second layer, comparatively, why is it worse? We acknowledge that on their side they will say that on our side monopolization will exist because like these China cars are now dominated, they're more cheap and etc. But we say it is still better on our side because exactly like you give the exposure and access towards these Chinese cars to exist in your country, because now that they want to do that, we say that this opens a more freeway or incentive for these other countries to also produce the same like technologies, or like to able to like advance or analyze how these technologies from these Chinese cars are being implemented and how they're able to keep up with this. We say that this is the only thing that gives the incentive. It does not exist anti-proposition. Therefore, you need to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
4 points of clarification before I move on to my issues. Number one, I don't understand why opposition side of the house tries to push this contradictive view of having having to prove the urgency, right? Because you already provide to you in Gabi why China has the incentive to debt trap countries in the first place. Meaning, right, there is an urgency in the first place because we do not want as the EU, right, to be dominated by China. But secondly, then, just because we put high tariffs does not mean China still does not mean that China does not have an incentive to still keep sending these cars to the EU, right? Because they still want to have a market in EU. Exactly then, for all of those reasons, right, research and development can still exist on our side of the house. It's just that on our side of the house, we push for protectionism, right? But thirdly then, let's address the POI. They tell you that we only can rely on China because we do not have the capacity. Let's engage. Sure, but knowing that the EU has good human resources and education, that is an incentive coming from the country to push them for having like a capacity for these countries to actually develop, right? Note that the EU wants to thrive at the end of the day, right? They still want their own nation to develop. Exactly then, the a priori is to develop your own country in the first place, right? You push for protectionism, you push for self-production. That is how you become a global superpower, right? But fourthly then, I'd like to point out how they contradict their own case, right? Because they keep saying, oh, you need to prove how there is a sense of urgency. And then in the same speech, they keep saying, oh, this is a long-term problem. So I don't think that you can just simply yeah, I think you need to be more consistent, right? So moving on to my issues then. Number one, is it counterproductive or not? They say that it's not going to be productive because it's not going to be cheap, it's not going to be accessible. We think that this firstly, this will not happen, right? Because exactly then we tell you that the EU already has incentive to push for like protectionism and to develop their own human resources in order to actually build their own like EVs, for example, right? We think that exactly then, because it is produced domestically, it is going to be more cheaper, right? It is still going to be more accessible. Exactly why we don't want China then to want to dominate the market then. But secondly, I don't think like this is exclusive, right? Because I think that at the end of the day, it's still going to be a bit more pricier on their side of the house, because at the end of the day, you're still importing from China, you're still going to pay for like the trade routes and etc. Meaning that it's going to be less inaccessible on their side of the house. So second issue then on R&D, they tell you that, oh, we cannot have R&D because we're not going to be exposed to China. Then again, I've already clarified to you why that's not true, because we're still going to be exposed. It's just that they're going to pay higher tariffs and etc. But first response is that this is not true, right? Because protectionism still exists on our side of the house. We're just going to have like an inward push coming from your own country to actually develop your own human resources, to develop into like more better technology, because we believe that at the end of the day you want to thrive, right? But secondly, this is not no later. Secondly, this is not exclusive, right? Because yeah, at the end of the day, there's still incentives coming from you to want to improve. So, but yeah, before that, go ahead.
What's the likelihood of your internal push to be succeed in developing, like even Tesla, the current status quo, have so many flaws and is to begin with very accessible and only the accessible
I mean, like at the end of the day, right? This is a long-term problem. Like exactly then, there is no like there is no like we don't really need to like prioritize having it to be as fast as possible. Then again, the EU wants to have a long-term solution. Then we give you that solution, right? Moving on to my extension then. Why not putting tariffs is bad and China is going to be predatory. Here's the issue. The thing is with China is that they're predatory for three reasons. Number one, they want to dominate the economy. Number two, they want to spread influence. But thirdly, they want to compete with US. This is true because you see that China is constantly giving loans, and then after that, they put like higher interest rates, and then they debt trap countries, like what Gaby explained to you in Sri Lanka, right? They want to build the like ports in these countries, like how they push like the Belt Road Initiative, which means that they want to like use other countries as a stepping stone in order to ensure their success. But why is it problematic? Two reasons. Number one, because to begin with, China does not have good incentive for these countries, right? They only see them as a stepping stone. But secondly, in the process of them debt trapping these countries, people are going to suffer, right? When they debt trap countries, for example, and put higher pricing points for oil, other people are going to suffer because you're going to have to pay more for gas, because you're going to have to pay more for like for like your daily expenses, right? Because everything relies on gas. But secondly, what happens when we rely on China? I think that number one, there's a domination of the market, right? This hampers the competitors that exist in the EU market because then again, because China gives you like cheaper stuff and it's going to have like good quality. But why is this bad? Because it prevents innovation, right? Notice then, if China dominates the market because they're so cheap and they're so good, this gives you like a stagnant market in the EU. It is not in the interest of EU to actually have like a stagnant market, right? They always want to develop. Therefore, if you want innovation then on your side of the house, you have to have competition. Exactly why we want to limit China's influence on EU's market, right? Because it is important for EU to push for protectionism because they want to have innovation at the end of the day. But secondly, on the debt trap, if China is able to debt trap EU, for example, they're going to take over the EU's trade lines, right? So China is going to control the EU's economy, like how they debt trap Sri Lanka, for example, right? Exactly. Then they want to keep pushing their influence. They're going to hamper the citizens of EU. But thirdly, then this makes the EU and US's friendship unstable, right? Because the EU is going to keep out asking help from China if this is not going. If this is EU is going to keep asking help from China. This is bad because China and US are competing, right? This means that, for example, in other scenarios, EU is not going to be able to ask for help from US, for example, or they're going to be cut off from exclusive deals, or they're going to be excluded from like these trade lines, for example. I think that the impact here is twofold. Number one, when you push something like the Belt Road Initiative, China will spread your influence. They're going to control the market. Therefore, when they have control over these markets, right, there's the sole competitor, market segmentation is not going to be possible. This is harmful because people are not always rich. People are middle class, people are lower class. Market segmentation exists as a check and balance mechanism to ensure that everyone still has their own individual market, right? Because we think that the livelihood of other people is so important, right? Exactly then, when there is a sole competitor that hampers innovation and hampers market segmentation, that is really harmful towards the people. But secondly then, China gets money, right? Which means that they have other leverages to try and debt trap even more countries. Imagine if China already is able to debt trap EU, what's stopping them from actually competing with other countries like US, for example, and try to take over like trade lines, for example, and that's going to and put like higher tariffs on those trade lines, right? That's going to like disrupt the balance of these trade lines, and it's going to hamper a lot of countries' economic like activities, right? The comparative here is twofold. Number one, you can still opt in into R&D on our side of the house. That is to say that because we push for protectionism, you're going to develop your human resources. EVs are going to be like more innovative that can emit even less carbon and etc. But secondly, then you're going to have like more money to develop your own country, right? Because all of the money are going to get like allocated to the EU itself. Which means that firstly, you can get better healthcare for your citizens, for example, right? Because then you would have more money to funnel into like better like healthcare programs and etc. But secondly, then you could also push for better education of citizens on our side of the house. Exactly then, because we don't because all of the money goes to EU in the first place. I think the way here is at least on our side of the house, we still keep a check and balance towards the citizens because we provide to you market segmentation and explain to you why it's important. For all of those reasons, very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pronoun is he, him. When your civilians is already overwhelmed with polluted gas of vehicles and have a declining health in your country because of the environmental degradation, now you still want to like make your own capacity, make your own establishment of vehicles that takes like years to do so while your civilians is like dying in the street at the end of the day. This what will be created in the theme proposition. What are we willing to do? Is we're very willing to trade off like the profit or like the economy that we will be reliant towards China. It is okay, panels, because at the end of the day, what is the most urgent is that we want to utilize their green technology, their electronic vehicles to save our environment and to like have an environmental sustainability from the Eurozone at the end of the day. This is what we want to champion here. Two clashes here regarding the exchange of first speaker. First, regarding the reliance and the justification of it. They proposition come and say that we're going to be reliant because of the dominance of the China from our economy and etc. We already clearly state like one, it is very okay because this is what we need to begin with because we don't have the capacity as an Euro countries to like establish our own environmental friendly field. Like notice how even Tesla to begin with in the status quo have so many flaws panels like e.g. Like so many flaws like e.g. is only being accessible towards like the privileged ones and etc. Meaning the only thing that we want to cater now is we want to make it all accessible towards everyone in like Eurozone for them to have a better environmental sustainability. And B, it is better on our side because we don't want to like cut the ties between us as an EU and with China panels. We want to like maintain our relationship with them to open more opportunities and have a better relationship. Like e.g., we can like have more field to work to like establish a better work together, like in terms of other fields economically or even import and export for more like utilities and etc. We also maintain the relationship. Therefore, on our side, we said that even if when they said that they're going to create their own, where it is step by step, we want a step-by-step process, and it is a long-term urgency, we say never panels. Because A, it is already time sensitive to begin with, where you need a direct solution for these people. And secondly, like we say that your reliance will what makes your like Eurozone is even more vulnerable towards the environment, and you don't have any more alternatives at the end of the day. Therefore, the weighing here is which is more important for the sustainability of the like Eurozone countries in environmental wise. We said that it is more better on our side because we provide a direct solution and we don't cut ties and have a better relationship with China as an as an EU at the end of the day. Before that, yes.
You want to save pollution through buying at the cost of economic growth from the Eurozone, meaning that they, at the end of the day, would not have enough money to push for better environment because at the end of the day, batteries will have to be thrown into a pile of batteries.
Like isn't when you have like an already choices for you to provide and to utilize, like you can have your people already have their own choices to begin with and to utilize in your country at the end of the day. And therefore, we said on the long term, they can still self-produce through like this relationship that they will still maintain with China at the end of the day. I will explain more in my extensions. Second question regarding innovations. Let's just reframe this to begin with, panels. EU has never had the capacity to make their own production to begin with, panels. Like, how can you expect like the competition to be pushed internally when like US and Huawei have very poor capacity to begin with? How are you expecting for like UK and Huawei have to compete? And at the end of the day, we said that the best thing that we can do is to rely on them, and the innovations will like come like afterwards after we cater the most urgent problem here. Therefore, they come and say that they're going to create a self-production and even cater towards the health industry. Firstly, we said that this is a very far-fetched argument. Like we don't catch any likelihoods of how it can cater towards the health industry from the countries in EU itself. And secondly, we say that the self-production will never happen because notice how the Tesla or like the production in the status quo is very less developed. Like even like you can notice in the social media or like everywhere being spread how like Tesla even to charge the vehicles is already hard to begin with, and how it is very underdeveloped for these countries to make their own establishment. At the end of the day, we don't think we can credit their points. A third argument then regarding the practical manifestation of self-production on our side. Well, let's see then if their case is really want to make countries in Europe establish their own like sophisticated cars, green technology, and etc. We say it is very unlikely because A, we say it's already a complexity production, and B, there is already a high urgency where we need a faster and accessible solution to counter mechanize the environmental degradation because the environment is already threatened to begin with, and like environmentalists is already protesting everywhere for us to create a choices for these civilians in the Eurozone to have a, like options to be more environmental friendly at the end of the day. Therefore, why is it then on our side will be better on self-producing at the end of the day rather than their side? Two things here. One is is because we have a flowing supply of green technology. Notice that learning process of country to have like implement their own establishment happens when they are more exposed and more implemented towards like green technology. There's already developed panels. The parallel is that e.g. like Indonesia can create their own animations like Nusa and Rara because they're dominated by Upin Ipin, for example. They learn from it and they're like pushed to create their own establishment at the end of the day. Why is this likely then? Two reasons here. A, because there is an analysis of production when it is being like flowed and is being imported to our country. Where e.g. like when we see like a product from other countries, we learn from how to do it and like the flaws or like what's enough that are being implemented from those products. And B, it pushed the incentives for like our own country's companies to have their own market. But why is it there on our side? Because we already provide a current need for the environmental that is more accessible. Meaning, like while China and we still rely on towards them, they can also still like the same time we still can like produce our train and develop our own like self-produced production at the end of the day, while we still cater towards the most urgent problem at the end of the day. And secondly, it's because we create a better relationship with the China itself. Notice like how in the status quo, it is already like a very high tension between EU and China. Like notice when you just create a very high overprice from China for China to import, this will be perceived like as a demon like actions for EU to do. Like China will be very sensitive to like perceive this at the end of the day. The implications on their side is China will easily opt out from like producing and importing towards EU. Why? Like A, notice how China has so many countries to begin with for them to import on. Like Indonesia, they can still import towards us, or like other countries, they're very reliant towards them to begin with. And B, like China have already like this internal tension between EU, meaning a very like little movement that make them like demonize them. At the end of the day, will make them like very easily to cut ties between the relationship them with EU at the end of the day. But then comparatively then, on our side, how does we make this a better relationship when like they have to still maintain like the economy benefit at the end of the day? This will implies into like one, there are like influences between like the styles or the mechanic of the production that comes from the China itself. It looks like how in Indonesia we also like implement the production or like the mechanic that comes from Japan to create our own vehicles. Like we learn from them from like their blueprint and etc. at the end of the day. Or like B, there are still like a work together or like a program that's being done from these two countries or like two continents at the end of the day, because they maintain the relationship. They can like manifest that into like doing like briefings or like meetings to create a market together in field of like vehicles at the end of the day. We say on the practically for a better relationship of EU and China, vote for team opposition.
Thank you. Teacher.
Please give me a few seconds to tidy up my notes. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1.
I think what opposition doesn't understand in today's debate is how when we're talking about trade, it involves with international relations and on how we have to keep some friendships that are worth it and we don't have to interact with some countries that are not going to give us benefit. So let's take a look at three main cases that opposition brought to today's debate. Their whole case talks about three things. Firstly, the capacity for EU. Secondly, a solution that's more eco-friendly. And thirdly, whether or not they want to maintain their relationship with China. Let's break this down one by one. Into my first rebuttal, we'll tackle about how they say that EU doesn't have the capacity. Two responses. Firstly, we think it's not true. The EU already has 27 countries. The EU is well developed if we compare it to other countries like Indonesia, Africa. It's more developed. Even with unequal economics, we can see how in EU there are still some developed countries, like let's just take a look at Germany. They have very good innovation, they have very good education. And talking about how in EU you don't need visas. No, thank you. I'll take it later. In EU, you don't need visas to like go to other countries. Therefore, it's easier for you to study in the more developed countries in EU, like in Germany. It's easier for you to study there, to work there. So if they say that not every country in EU have the capacity to like get good education or good innovation, we say it's easy for you to go to other countries and go back to your home countries that's like less developed and build it there. So we think that it's education, it's accessible, and because of that, by like going to other more countries with like better education and going home to boost that productivity, that's actually the solution that EU can apply in order to start making the countries there more equal. So like if they say that EU doesn't have the capacity, we think that EU already has the capacity from like innovation, education, which is education, and secondly that EU are already pretty financially stable because they're a pretty well developed country. Because of that, we think that EU has the capacity. Therefore, their first argument brought down, their first main point. I'll take your POI.
We never deny that these level of countries exist, but like on the terms of European making green technology, especially like electric vehicles, there is never a clear example of capacity for them to manufacture at the end of the day.
Thank you. I'll be explaining that in my first clash. So let's go to the first clash in today's debate about which side of the house can create a vehicle that's more eco-friendly. If opposition's whole case is the urgency to save the earth, we can do it and we can bring it better. Let's talk about green technology that they keep talking about, that they keep bringing. If they want to advocate for environment, we can do it too. If we take a look at these electric vehicles that they call are so good for the environment, we take a look at how it's developed. The battery from the electric car is made out of lithium cobalt that's technically not renewable energy. Therefore, these batteries inside this renewable car that's so green technology, it's not even going to be efficient because of how in every few years, like 4 to 5 years, you have to change this battery. And basically, when you change this battery is just going to waste and it can't be renewable. And it's going to harm the environment even more. So let's just say like 4 years you didn't pay for gas, you use electric car, at the end, you're still going to be involved in environmental damage because of the battery your car produces. So we say it's not even a good enough solution on their side to bring green technology from China. We say we bring an alternative from the very first speaker. We talk about how the EU has 27 countries and of how it's pretty well developed. Therefore, from the innovation that my first speaker has pushed, it will establish like more companies to like make vehicles, or even if we want to make like these green technology vehicle, I guess it'll take longer time, but we say it's going to be worth it because like when these countries don't rely on China for vehicles, they then push innovation. Like my second speaker has brought, it will give out market segmentation because of how there's so many other car companies now developed in EU. They're going to be competing against each other. There's going to be market segmentation. So accessibility, it's already solved from the very beginning. From many innovation, people want to have different pricing points. So therefore, it will be more accessible for everyone because not all the cars will be expensive. And how will this help the environment, you may ask? We want to help the environment because of how every time someone makes a purchase that's like in like an expensive, a luxury purchase, it's like there's a luxury tax, and we all know it. And from this tax that people buy these like cars from you, even though the cars aren't electric, we say it's still going to help because these taxes, like my first have said, these taxes will be used by the government to help infrastructure. The infrastructure that we mean from the very beginning is to help improve public transport, whether it's making more bus line, whether it's making more train line or even improving the quality, the cleanness of these public transport to encourage people to want to use this public transport. So we say, even if we take longer time to develop these electric vehicles, we say the taxes from the cars that we push through innovation on our side that's exclusive, the taxes we use to improve public transport, therefore creating a more eco-friendly solution. So if they want an eco-friendly solution, we brought to you that's better, that also doesn't use lithium cobalt battery that will harm the environment, which is even worse. So because of that, we can come to the conclusion how government side of the house wins the first clash about which side of the house can create a vehicle that it's more eco-friendly or a solution that's more eco-friendly. Moving on to the second clash, which is whether or not it's okay if China dominates the market. Opposition comes to this house saying they want to maintain this relationship with China, making how they want to make their relationship more close with China. Well, two responses. Firstly, we say it's not true because of how, let's talking about international relations, we have to look at the history of EU. EU is always very close with the US. EU has always cooperates with the US. Therefore, because of how China and the US are always competing to be this like global superpower, we think that when EU relies too much on China and builds a strong relationship, it's going to break ties with the US. And my second speaker has already said why it's going to be harmful on how if China does over-dominate in the market. Because of how, let's take a look at China and the US because of how they're competing. Even though China does have capacity, we say how it's more worth it to continue their friendship with the US because of how US has more capacity than China. That's why like the US is a global superpower country right now because of how they have stronger military than China and etc. So we think it's not necessary to like rely too much on China because like of how my second speaker have brought up, like let's take a look at China's characteristic. They love to debt traps people. They love to just like use other countries as a stepping stone, and we don't want EU to fall into the victims of China. So because of that, we think that the partnership is going to be more benefited for the EU when it's happening with the US instead of with China. That's why we say we don't want to rely on China. We don't want the EU to fall into debt traps, and we don't want this to happen again because of how, like my second speaker, when the EU works too much with China, basically the EU is giving money to China too, for China to use this as leverage with like other countries like Sri Lanka, like my first speaker has mentioned. Therefore, we say that it's not going to be worth it. Due to that, we can come to the conclusion of how when you want to weigh this, we have to weigh what's going to happen to the EU and what's going to happen to the world or over when the EU makes friendship with US or China. We say that with China, it's just going to help China dominate this world, and we have already said why it's going to be bad because of how China just want the profit. And comparatively, if you weigh it with the EU as it is right now, not really relying on China, it's going to be better because of how the EU will also push itself as a country to become a more developed country. Due to that, we can come to the conclusion that government side of the house wins the second clash about whether or not it's okay when China dominates the market. And with the two clash that has been dominated by the government, we can come to the conclusion that government side of the house have won this debate. Thank you. Very proud to propose.
Yes, we concede that the Europe countries, for example, have the capabilities, for example, to make development at the end of the day. But the fact that now they're creating this electric cars, for example, such as Tesla, for example, is very inaccessible and take a long time. That's why we say that they still need to rely with the China that give more accessible. That's better for the environment at the end of the day. Two major reasons why they should lose this debate. Firstly, they keep talking about debt traps on their side, but realize that they never explain, for example, how it looks like or how it works, for example, on their side of the house. That's why we say this argument for at the end of the day. But then secondly, they talking about how when you, for example, take more tax from the China, for example, you can allocate it from the healthcare, for example, or education. We say there is no likelihood, for example, how this is going to happen, or we say that this is very jumpy at the end of the day. How when you just suddenly when you give more tax to China, for example, you suddenly give more to the healthcare at the end of the day. But we also say that this Europe country, for example, already have a good education, for example, or a good healthcare at the end of the day. Therefore, we say that we don't understand what is the importance of this argument at the end of the day. But even if, for example, this Europe country still need the development about healthcare, for example, or education, we say that exactly because they still on their side, for example, the Europe still need development of this thing. All of their development, for example, will only cater to this thing at the end of the day. Therefore, it's not likely for them, for example, to create electric cars that is more accessible towards the people. Therefore, we say that we still need to rely on this on these cars from China. One point of rebuttal for moving on to our class. They say that on their whip, they say that this quality, for example, from cars from China is bad. For example, they talk about battery, etc. To respond for this, first we say no. We already explained to you on our LO that there will be, for example, consideration or regulation, for example, from the EU, for example, that they make sure that the quality is good enough, for example, when they gonna use it in the country at the end of the day. But then secondly, even if, for example, the quality is not that good, we say that this is what will help EU countries to make better development. For example, they can learn from these cars these cars, for example, and create better at the end of the day. At the end of the day, we also say that there's solution about creating eco-friendly transportation. For example, talking about bus or traffic light, we say that this is already exists in the status quo, for example. But exactly because it exists and it's not effective, that's why we still should rely on these cars from China at the end of the day. Two point of clash I'm going to talk about on my speech. Firstly, but before moving on.
Even with better quality, at the end of the day, these electric cars need the battery that's going to harm the environment. So even with better quality, it's still.
We say that even if we already said that even if the quality is not that good at the end of the day, we say this is a time-sensitive issue for example, that you at least need to sacrifice this. And we also say that there is already check, for example, from the UN market at the end of the day. Therefore, we say that it won't be as bad, for example, that it will harm strike away harm the environment and that worse on our side. But moving on to my clash about the urgency. They say that on their side, the problem that happening is that this Europe country is rely too much on China. To respond for this, firstly, we say that relying is already happened in the status quo. It's not only on these cars, for example, company that owned by China, or how there is a lot of things that created in China, and also the Europe, for example, is already relying on China. Therefore, we say that with or without this tax, for example, the Europe still rely on China. That's why we say, therefore, with giving tax to these cars, for example, did not solve their problem that this Europe country still country rely too much much on China. Therefore, we say this their argument for at the end of the day. But then secondly, even if they rely so much on China, we say it's okay because these cars, for example, is really needed. There's a time-sensitive issue, for example, such as environment degradation, for example. Therefore, we say that also the reason why China being rely on the reason why Europe rely on China because they are the one who can provide this technology faster and cheaper, for example. Therefore, we say we should not prioritize the profit that this Europe country want, for example, when they are developing their own technology. Rather we say that our urgency better when we prioritize the environmental condition at the end of the day. But they respond to this that they say there will be monopolization, for example, in the market. Therefore, it creates no competition. We say that no, this monopolization is what going to create better competition. How? Because now China cars, for example, being cheap and accessible, but also have good quality, have good quality. For example, it creates the likelihood from other company that want to create electric car, for example, that want to compete to make their cars going have better quality than the China than that one than the one that China produced, for example, but also make it accessible and cheap. Therefore, it can use by all people. We say the other but then we also say the other cars company, for example, when there is a monopolization, it's not going to prevent competition because we say the other cars company, for example, still have the abilities, for example, to make better to make these cars at the end of the day. Therefore, we say that this is what going to make better competition. But then moving on to my second clash about development, they say that it is better on their side to develop their own technology. We say, but to respond for this, firstly, we say that the reason why the Europe want to stop to give this tax, for example, to stop the China to monopolize to give cars that is much more accessible, for example, because they are scared when China dominate, they cannot get as much profit when they create their own technology such as Tesla at the end of the day. But what this mean? This mean when they create their own cars, it will be likely for them to make it more expensive, much more expensive, or how it's much more likely because they use their own resources. For example, they do this on their own. Therefore, it's going to be much more expensive and take much more time. That's why we say that cars such as Tesla, for example, is not accessible. But we say that there is an urgency that happening in the world. Therefore, we say that they still should rely on China when buying this kind of cars. So proud to.
Thank you. Multiply.
A downfall of the environment sustainability of eurozone and the more tension between euro and China is what will be created in the opposition in the proposition side at the end of the day. 2 points here that I'm going to bring in my reply speech. First, regarding the urgency that is we should discuss to begin with in this debate. They name proposition never realized the urgency, which is the big reasons why the tariffs are going to be explicitly imposed to vehicles from China that is most likely an electronic vehicles at the end of the day. Why? Because we're going to play other cases like dominance and trades. Notice that this kind of things can be applied to all motions panels, like e.g. This house leader like EU should cut ties with China and etc. can use all these arguments to begin with regarding trades and dominance of China. But the reasons why EU has the interest to have a tax, a standard tax towards China explicitly on vehicles is because there is an existence of an urgency for them to counter-mechanize the environmental degradation degradation that happens in the Euro countries at the end of the day. We are the only teams that provides this urgency clearly and crystallized because we say that the EU has already, as a developed countries that provides many resources to detect like the vulnerability of environment, and they have like already high awareness towards green technology. They have already know that this is something that is urgent to begin with to be catered. But the only thing that they don't have is like the utility to counter mechanize this, which we say that at the end of the day, they should be rely on China towards them. Meaning, this urgency is the most thing to be, it is the most important thing to be discussed in this debate, and all arguments regarding market dominance and monopolizations will always be less urgent on their side at the end of the day. Secondly, regarding like the effectivity and the efficiency of implementing these technologies. Their side is not only like they're going to make the EU as a self-production is going to be have less capacity, but notice when we're going to pay attention towards their mechanism, like they're going to reallocate the taxes that they're gaining towards many things like health, education, and transport and transportation. Two responses towards this, like A, why is it urgent to begin with for you to like reallocate these taxes for like this education and healthcare and etc., knowing that we both already recognize that this is a developed country to begin with, there's no urgency to like reallocate these taxes towards them. Or like B, even on the worst case, we will try to discuss again about environment. On your side, it's even more time consuming. Why? Because you spread the focus of this EU zone, EU countries to like have to reallocate and fund so many things that you have to create a less prioritization towards the most urgent issues at the end of the day, which is the environment itself. And even if then they're going to like create a more a self-production. We already stated that there are so many examples of like failures or like in so many production that is not enough to begin with from like the EU zone itself. Like e.g., there are so many examples like Tesla are being very inaccessible to begin with, and like it is already having underdeveloped machine, like you have to charge it everywhere, and it is very inaccessible at the end of the day. Therefore, on your side, you will only make these people even more dying and even more like people die because of the environmental degradation itself, and will like create so many backlashes between the eurozone at the end of the day. Comparatively, on our side, we provide an effectivity because we give them a direct solution towards a big urgency at the end of the day. We provide them a solution that is, to begin with, one, is not very harmful towards our towards EU at all, because like economically we have so many like alternatives to stay and will not be monopolized, because we have so many like alternatives to still be sustainable in economy from these countries like US and UK and etc. And B, we give them like a more relationship towards one another and create a sustainability towards this EU and China at the end of the day. To save the environment in the EU and maintain the relationship, please vote for team opposition.
I think that opposition has misconstrued this debate from the very beginning. 4 points why they lose from the very beginning. Number one, opposition has misconstrued the characterization of EU because we tell you that they are strong to begin with. They frame us as EU being small and weak and not financially capable, right? But we already proved to you in Gabi why EU, comprised of 27 countries to begin with, are already that strong. They are able to develop themselves. They already have the capacity. But secondly, notice that how opposition contradicts themselves when they say that they are okay with sacrificing profit, yet in the same speech, they want to push for research and development. They're sacrificing their money. How are they going to push for R&D? Therefore, the implication here is that the benefit of R&D cannot fly because they never elaborate to you why then R&D still exists without money, right? Therefore, their whole case of R&D cannot fly. Thirdly then, notice how opposition never responded to China having predatory strategies to sustain themselves. Because we tell you then, the benefit of China helping EU is contingent upon China being good, upon China not being predatory. Therefore, because they never tried to respond it, this idea cannot fly. Therefore, China is still predatory. Therefore, there's still no access to green technology on their side of the house. Fourthly, then, their case is contingent on EU having bad environment. But notice then how this is dealt with Gabby's POI, because she told you that EU already has good infrastructure that is already environmentally friendly, right? Exactly then, this is not about the urgency that that opposition tries to push. Two clashes then in this debate. Number one, which side provides a more eco-friendly solution? Government came into this debate, and we tell you that R&D is important because it breeds innovation and it only comes from competition, right? Exactly then, because competition only exists when there is no sole dominator in the market. Opposition came and told you that only China has the capacity. But notice then how I responded to you in all three speeches that EU is still big, they have good human resources and education, they have an incentive to push for protectionism and development. I think the weighing here is which one gives a better eco solution, right? The tipping point goes to government side of the house because we tell you that the cost of importing from China is expensive, right? We give you an analysis why it's better to be cost friendly, right? And why China is going to push for like predatory pricing and etc. But yeah, at the end of the day, it is because we reduce the price of having more eco-friendly solutions because we push for protectionism and domestic manufacturing. That is why it is better and more efficient on our side of the house. So second question, is it okay for China to dominate the market? We tell you that it is not okay because China is predatory and keeps debt trapping countries. They tell us that it is okay, but notice how there is no explanation why is it good to actually for China to dominate. They only concede that this will happen in the future. We tell you then that the importance of development for EU is important, is very important, right? Because we are acting in the interest of EU. Opposition backlashes this by saying it's okay to sacrifice profit to sacrifice profit as long as they can still keep ties with China, right? I think at the end of the day, the weighing here is that which side caters best to the interest of the EU. Because notice then, notice how EU is the main actor in this debate. It is the tipping point is when government prove to you why EU being dominated by China is bad, right? Because we tell you that market segmentation is important for EU because it's comprised of 27 countries that all of those citizens are not like rich people, right? Because we tell you then in DPM why that market segmentation is so important in the first place. We think that because opposition has failed to give you like a solution towards these people who are not financially capable, for example, it is when they do not want to have market segmentation that they damn their whole case, right? We think that for all of those reasons, then, we're very proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the end of the debate. Thank you, everyone. Round four, shake hands. Please get out of the public member.
Thank you.